The life of the Prophet Muhammad. Events following the birth of the Prophet. According to narrations, when the Prophet Muhammad was born, the joyous news was immediately sent to his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, by Amin. Amin, whose original name was Baraka, was the maid of Abdullah, the Prophet's father. Later, the Prophet arranged her marriage to his freed slave, Zaid bin Haritha, and they had a son, Usama bin Zaid. Overjoyed, Amin ran to Abdul Muttalib, who was in the Kaaba at the time, and informed him of the birth. Hearing the news, Abdul Muttalib was elated and rushed home with her. Upon seeing the beauty of the young prophet, he was astonished and expressed his feelings in verses, describing the beauty of the newborn as surpassing even the charm of the Gilman, handsome boys of paradise. He thanked Allah for blessing him with this grandson as a substitute for his son Abdullah. Note the Prophet's father Abdullah, grandfather Abdul Muttalib, and great-grandfather Hashim were all known for their striking beauty and dignity, much like the Prophet himself. Various sources, including those from Imam Bayhaqi and companions like Abbas bin Abdul Muttalib and his son Abdullah bin Abbas, report that the Prophet was born circumcised. Abdul Muttalib was amazed by this and expressed great delight. Imam Bayhaqi also narrates from multiple sources that after the Prophet's birth, Abdul Muttalib entrusted him to the care of the women in his household. Each morning, these women would inform Abdul Muttalib of the child's exceptional nature. They noticed that the baby would always be awake at dawn, gazing at the sky with wide-open eyes. Abdul Muttalib would joyfully remark that his grandson was destined for greatness. For the first few days, the Prophet's mother, Amina, nursed him. After 2 or 3 days, he was nursed by Thuwayba, the freed slave of Abu Lahab. Abu Lahab freed her in celebration of the Prophet's birth. Thuwayba had also nursed the Prophet's uncle, Hamza, and other children. Unfortunately, Abu Lahab, who initially celebrated the Prophet's birth, later became one of his fiercest opponents. Alongside his wife, Jamil, he spent his life opposing Islam. Abu Lahab likely played a significant role in misleading the Quraysh of Makkah and cursing the Prophet during his public call to monotheism on Mount Safa. Jamil even scattered thorns on paths where the Prophet would walk. These actions led to the revelation of an entire surah, Surah al-Masad, condemning Abu Lahab and his wife, which will be detailed in future episodes. The naming and Aqiqah ceremony. On the 7th day after the Prophet's birth, his grandfather Abdul Muttalib performed the Aqiqah ceremony and invited the Quraysh to join in the celebration. During the gathering, someone asked, "O Abdul Muttalib, have you named your grandson?" Abdul Muttalib replied, "Yes, I have named him Muhammad." Hearing this name, the Quraysh were astonished as it was unprecedented in Arab history. Their surprise was understandable given that no one had ever been named Muhammad before. The custom of sending infants to the desert. At that time, it was customary for the elite and noble families of Makkah to send their infants to the surrounding villages and deserts. This practice ensured that the children would grow up in a pure environment, learn the eloquent Arabic language, and imbibe the unique characteristics of the Bedouins. This tradition was so cherished that even the Umayyad rulers, despite their royal grandeur, adhered to it. However, when Caliph al-Walid bin Abdul Malik was unable to follow this tradition due to specific circumstances, it led to his lack of fluency in classical Arabic, making him the only Umayyad caliph without this linguistic finesse. Twice a year, women from the nearby villages would come to Makkah seeking infants to nurse. In exchange, they would receive monetary compensation, enough to sustain them comfortably. Among the women who came seeking infants was Halima Sa'diyah from the tribe of Banu Hawazin. While the other women managed to find children to nurse, Halima was initially unsuccessful. Why Halima was unable to find a child and how she eventually came to nurse the Prophet are fascinating accounts narrated in historical sources. Due to the length of this episode, these events and the miraculous occurrences at Halima's home will be detailed in the next. In the care of Halima. Halima Sa'diyah arrived in Makkah with some women of her tribe in search of infants to nurse. In this episode, we will recount the fascinating events narrated by Halima herself about how she came to care for the Prophet Muhammad. Ibn Ishaq, through Jaham bin Abi Jaham, relays the account of Abdullah bin Ja'far bin Abi Talib, who heard it directly from Halima Sa'diyah. She narrates, When news of multiple births in the noble families of Makkah reached the tribe of Banu Sa'id, a sub-tribe of Banu Hawazin, to which I belonged, the women of Banu Sa'id would rush to Makkah to nurse these infants for a fee. One such year, when several children were born in Makkah's distinguished families, 10 women, including myself, set out with our husbands and nursing infants. These were days of drought and famine, and we had nothing left. I was riding a frail white donkey, and we also had an emaciated camel that barely gave any milk. My child cried incessantly from hunger, and we couldn't sleep at night. I had no milk to feed him, and the camel couldn't provide anything either. We clung to hope for rain and prosperity. My donkey was so weak that it lagged behind, frustrating the entire caravan. Eventually, we reached Makkah, searching for infants to nurse. Every one of us was offered the Prophet Muhammad, but when we learned that he was an orphan, we all refused. We relied on the child's father for financial compensation, and we thought, what could an orphan's widow mother and his grandfather possibly give us for this reason? None of us wanted to take him. By the time we were ready to leave, all the other women had found children to nurse, but I had not. I disliked returning empty-handed while my companions took babies home. I told my husband, I will take that orphan child. I cannot bear to go back without a child. My husband said, there is no harm in it. Perhaps Allah will bless us through him. That night was the most challenging. We had no food for ourselves or fodder for our animals, and my baby cried all night, unable to nurse. Exhausted and hungry, I stayed awake until morning. The next day, I went to take the orphan child. I also hoped that his mother might give us enough to sustain ourselves and our animals. When I met the child's mother, Amina, she greeted me warmly and handed over her baby. The fee she gave me was more than I expected. Moreover, the child, whom I had initially hesitated to take, was the most beautiful baby I had ever seen. When he was placed in my lap and nestled against me, I felt a peace and comfort that is hard to describe. When I returned to my camp and nursed him, my breasts filled with milk, and he drank until he was full. My own son also nursed to his heart's content, and both of them slept peacefully, something that had not happened before. My husband went to milk the camel and found its udders full of milk. He milked enough for both of us to drink to our satisfaction, and we spent that night in comfort. The next morning, my husband said, Halima, by Allah, you have taken a blessed soul. I replied, I believe so too. We then departed with our caravan. I rode the same weak donkey, but now, by Allah, it outran the entire caravan. None of the other donkeys could keep up with it. My companions exclaimed, O daughter of Abu Dhabi, what is this? Is this the same donkey you rode to Makkah? I replied, yes, by Allah, it is the same. They said, there is surely something extraordinary about it.